अंग्रेज अपना लगान और न्यूज लॉन्ड्री अपना हफ्ता कभी नहीं छोड़ते. Welcome to another episode of Hafta in a news-packed week and month. In fact, it will be for us at News Laundry. Before I introduce the panel, I just want to tell our listeners, viewers, that we have 3 announcements regarding 3 different projects, one of which is a campaign. One is the Hindu Rashtra project, one is the Delhi election polls, and the third is the Fight to Breathe campaign, which will carry on through the year. I want to start off with the Delhi polls, the NL Sena. We have a separate budget for an election coverage whenever an election happens in a state or Lok Sabha. And because there's a lot more travel involved, a lot more resources deployed to cover the election. You know, some state NL Sena polls take longer to top up, some are topped up very quickly. But I'm really disappointed that the Delhi polls, which, you know, is our city and our state, is really moving very slowly. I think the overall ask for this NL Sena is about 9 lakh. And we have just about, I think it's been a week since we launched this campaign. Well, it's not a campaign, it's a Sena project. We're just at 55,000. This is probably the slowest. And in days of yore, the Delhi... anything Delhi related would get topped up the fast. Now, is this a sign of a fatigued Janta who doesn't want to know about elections? Or are they not interested in on-ground reporting? Or they're okay with softball interviews happening all around, generally? We want to focus on on-ground reporting and want to deploy at least 4 reporters and 4 producers. So, here's this QR code. Please scan it. Help us... make sure that our election coverage remains ad-free. And here is a little message from my colleagues.
दिल्ली वालों, इस चुनाव में आप न्यूज लॉन्ड्री को चुनिए.
Why, you ask? Because we have stood by our promise to bring you journalism driven by ground reporting.
चाहे एमपी और राजस्थान के गांव हों, जम्मू और कश्मीर की वादियां हों, या केरल, कर्नाटक, बंगाल, यूपी का कोई शहर हो, इंडिया के हर कोने से हम आप तक ठोस खबरें और इंटरव्यूज लाए हैं.
हमारी छोटी सी टीम of reporters, editors, producers, all of them have worked tirelessly every election for you, so that you, the voter, you do not have to witness something like this. शीश महल में सोने का कमोड नहीं.
शराब घोटाले के चक्कर में दिल्ली वालों का पैग हुआ महंगा, मधुशाला हुई नदारद.
अबे यार, ये कोई इलेक्शन रिपोर्टिंग है क्या?
Exactly. This election is not about शोर and तमाशा and तू मैं. It's about you guys.
तो दिल्ली विधानसभा चुनाव की टीआरपी फ्री और पब्लिक इंटरेस्ट रिपोर्टिंग के लिए हमारे एनएल सेना प्रोजेक्ट को सहयोग दें.
Scan this QR code and contribute an amount of your choice, ताकि आप तक खबरें पहुंचें, शोर नहीं.
And one of those colleagues, Manisha, is on leave, as is Raman sir. So today on the NL Hafta panel, we have in the studio with me, Shardool.
Hello.
Good to have you back, Shardool. I'm glad you're here so often.
Yes, I will be now.
Great.
Unless a truck hits me, but that nobody can predict.
Nobody can. And joining us from Chennai is Jayashree.
Hello. I have also not been hit by a truck.
On that forever optimistic note, Hafta as usual. We will have 2 guests joining us. Nidhi Razdan will be joining us in about 20 minutes after the headlines, where we will discuss Delhi polls and maybe some of the political campaigning in general. And later on, joining us will be Vivek Kaul. He is an economics and a financial journalist. I'm sure many of you have seen his stuff, not only on News Laundry, but in Mint, and he's written for several organizations. He's held senior positions at DNA, Economic Times, etc. So he'll be joining us after about 40 minutes, and we will discuss the dollar versus the rupee and other financial and economic news. But before we do all that, Jayashree, let's get the headlines.
Yes. So here are the headlines of the week. The Indian rupee plunged to a record low, crossing 86 against the US dollar on Monday. This is as stronger than expected US jobs data spurred concerns over potential delays in interest rate cuts by the Fed. And the downward spiral has been exacerbated by rising oil prices, weak capital inflows, and dwindling supplies of the dollar in local markets.
And if economists or commentators are to be believed, this is also because unnecessarily the RBI, the government of India, tried very hard to control the rate, and that always backfires.
Yes, I was going to say that if you, like me, struggle to understand about 1/3 of the words I just read out in terms of the headlines, Vivek Kaul will explain.
Yes.
Equally. So I spent a long time last night Googling, but what is crude oil? What does it do? So no shame at all.
But then I have a podcast recommendation that is really interesting, but it will actually explain a lot of stuff very simply. Simply, as good Mallus would say.
Okay, so the Union Home Ministry has given permission to the Enforcement Directorate to prosecute former Delhi Chief Minister Kejriwal, also his former deputy Manish Sisodia, in the liquor policy case.
Shocking, I'm so surprised.
Timing is highly suspect because Delhi's election is on February 5th.
And Nidhi has joined us midway through the headlines. Hi, Nidhi.
Hello.
Abhinandan, how are you? Hi, guys.
Hi.
Very well. We are rolling as we speak. The headlines we'll just finish and then we shall start the discussion.
Yes, so just in time for Nidhi's arrival, we will now go to the Delhi headlines, which is the Delhi police has filed a non-cognizable report against BJP leader Parvesh Verma. This is for allegedly distributing shoes to voters at a temple. He says he didn't. He's also accused of distributing goodies to female voters of his constituency. So the New Delhi district electoral officer has asked the police to probe. I believe there is a video of him doing so.
Yes, there is.
So, Congress MP Rahul Gandhi has alleged the RSS chief Mohan Bhagwat has insulted freedom fighters as well as every Indian citizen by claiming India's true independence was established only when the Ram temple in Ayodhya was inaugurated.
Right.
Then in news that consumed, I think, news TV media the whole of last night, Saif Ali Khan was stabbed 6 times by a man inside his Bandra home. This is in a burglary attempt. He was rushed to Leelavati Hospital in Bombay for surgery. I think 2 of his injuries were serious, but he is currently out of danger. I think there's also a war of words between political parties on law and order now in Mumbai. The Kerala police have arrested 56 people out of a total of 59 accused and registered a total of 29 cases. This is in connection with the alleged sexual abuse of a teenager. She's 18 years old. She alleged serial sexual abuse primarily when she was a minor over the past 5 years. We have a detailed story on this by the News Minute. In case you want to read it, it's on our website.
Right.
In a show of growing solidarity, 111 farmer union members have joined the hunger strike at the Kanori border on Wednesday. This marks the 337th day of the Dharna and the 51st day of Jagjit Singh Dhaliwal's fast. It should be noted the central government has still not responded to the farmers' demands. The Supreme Court on Wednesday issued a notice to the Centre and the Election Commission. This is after Jairam Ramesh filed a petition which challenges the validity of an amendment made to the conduct of election rules.
Yes.
This curtails public access to certain election records, including CCTV footage.
Yeah. From more transparency, from sunshine laws, we are moving towards darkness laws, one step at a time.
They passed it just few days after the court gave the decision. This is so brazen, and Election Commission gave no objection, which is strange.
In Chhattisgarh's Bijapur district, 5 suspected Maoists were killed on Sunday in a gunfight. With this, 14 suspected Maoists have been killed in separate operations in the first 12 days of the year. And in Manipur, 2 bombs exploded at Kangchum Phayang in Imphal West. No casualties were reported.
They were dropped by drones, apparently,
Yes.
both these bombs.
Yes. The Enforcement Directorate questioned BRS working president and former Telangana Minister K.T. Ramarao for about 7 hours on Thursday. This is in connection with the Formula E race case.
And he's really defiant on this. Let's see how this plays out.
Israel and Hamas have reached a ceasefire deal to halt fighting in the Gaza Strip and exchange Israeli hostages for Palestinian prisoners. Netanyahu had initially accused Hamas of backtracking on some details of the deal, but he has now said the deal has been reached. Simultaneously, the Palestinian Civil Defense Agency says nearly 80 people have been killed in Israeli airstrikes in Gaza since the announcement of the ceasefire.
Although on the ceasefire, I think his finance minister, his extreme right ally, has threatened to resign. So they've delayed the vote on this.
Yes. So it still hasn't come into effect. Essentially, It's not approved. And finally, Hindenburg Research, the US-based short seller company, will be disbanded. Its founder, Nate Anderson, said on Wednesday. He said there was no threat, but that the firm's intense work had taken a toll.
And meanwhile, because of this, there was prime time on every channel yesterday saying that this is a
Clean chit.
validation of Adani. I'm sure none of those anchors even know what a short is. But anyway, that's just the world we live in. So thank you, Nidhi, for joining us. My colleague Shardool and Jayashree, I don't know if you've met them before.
We haven't, but
may
hello.
have.
To meet you guys.
Hello.
Yes, we have, but not like this.
Okay, so I'm sure our audience knows Nidhi, but Aupcharikta hoti hai, the formality of introducing her. She's a very well-known Indian journalist, a TV anchor, author. She was executive editor of NDTV, and she was their prime time anchor of left, right, and center, the complexion of which is unrecognizable these days. I don't know whether she watches it, but she's too polite. She's not a jerk like me who says anything. She resigned from NDTV after having working there for more than 2 decades. So first of all, Nidhi, lovely shawl, man.
Thank you. My Kashmiri heritage.
Oh, right. Oh, it's a Kashmiri shawl. Oh, okay.
Yes. I wouldn't wear anything else.
Acha. Okay.
Regionalism.
Next time, I have to get some Phulkari from Punjab. So,
Wow. Okay.
let's start with the Delhi election. So, just an observation, Nidhi. Any other thing that you want to add, feel free. But I just want to kick this off with the campaign. I've noticed it's markedly or markedly. What's the correct pronunciation, Jayashree?
Markedly.
Markedly different from any other campaign of Delhi in the last few years, last 10 years. One, I don't see any Hindu Muslim. In fact, any mention that I see is of Rohingyas is from AAP, ironically. I don't see any Modi, double engine, none of that. As opposed to the previous years, this year, it seems to have reversed the nature of campaign. For example, their campaign was all about how Kejriwal is so horrible. As opposed to which was the BJP campaign used to be always a positive campaign that we can do this. Modi layenge, achhe din layenge, progress. Now it's about Sheesh Mahal, about Kejriwal hasn't kept his promise. And there is absolutely no mention of Hindu Muslim. And if you remember last time, I mean, depending on who you believe, even the riots were very convenient just before the election. Which is very different from Chhattisgarh campaign, which is all about Muslims.
Yes.
It is not around the Prime Minister. Do you see any specific strategy, or they have just tried everything else and now attacking Kejriwal is the only thing left? And is it working in your view?
I've had, shall we say, the pleasure or not of watching the birth of AAP as a journalist, how Kejriwal stormed onto the scene, how AAP rose, the way it conducted its campaigns over the last 10 years, and now this campaign as well. And you're right, there is an absence of Hindu-Muslim. I don't know whether that's also to do with the fact that Kejriwal is kind of Hindutva light. The AAP plays that card really well. So is that a pointless battle to get into for the BJP? That's one. I think secondly, there is a lot of baggage on Kejriwal in this election. I think this is his toughest election in all the last 10 years, simply because now he can't say he's the outsider, right? He can't say the AAP is the outsider that's coming to smash the establishment and make change and do good. Now you've been in power for a decade. People are judging you on what you've done on governance, mohalla clinics, corruption, etc., etc. Though I think the jury is still out on whether corruption is a big issue for people or for voters in general. I think in this country, I don't think it ranks particularly high. But I think for a party that made a virtue out of being the common man's party, the aadmi, I think the BJP is hoping that this controversy over the Sheesh Mahal, as they call it, the chief minister's residence, the arrests of top leaders of the AAP, they are hoping that at some level strikes a resonance with voters. But, Abhinandan, if you look at the campaign, the BJP doesn't really have a face in Delhi, right? I actually see them pushing the Prime Minister quite front and center in the campaign. I think they're banking on the Modi factor because they don't have a face per se. So it's quite a challenging election for the AAP this time in a very different way. Well, they're being judged on their own record also.
The banners and the radio ads that are, like, of course, the BJP's budget is 100 times anybody else's. There is no Modi. There is aapne ye kiya, aapne jhoot bola, isne sheesh mahal bana. Even the posters here on Outer Ring Road, on FM, all the, they have that guy impersonating Kejriwal's badas, etc. So, yeah, of course, they are probably banking on Modi, but their campaign doesn't have Modi as this is the man. It is more, this is the man, which is Kejriwal, and don't trust him. From far away in Chennai, what do you see, Jayashree? Are you
No,
at all following the campaign?
I think what Nidhi said is right, that the stakes are much higher for the AAP. And I feel like for the BJP, maybe a negative campaign rather than a positive one is easier or more effective, because from what I see is that the AAP's challenge is 10 years of anti-incumbency. It's all the corruption. You have a water crisis, sanitation, air pollution, whatever, which is why it's doing this entire barrage of fresh new schemes. For the BJP, I feel, honestly, it hasn't governed Delhi since when? 98, 97, something like that.
Yeah.
But I don't see this election as make or break for it as I do for the AAP, because the AAP is wiped in Delhi, then what does it have left? Because this is its entire promise, right? So, and the Congress, of course, wants to come back, but God knows. So I feel like what AAP should be doing is sort of explaining how it's trying to take forward its big ideas, which have possibly stalled, how this sort of tug of war with the LG in the center is playing out, what is its report card of like performance so far. Instead, we're getting all this sort of petty nonsense about the golden commode, about pointing fingers. And I think from what I see is that Kejriwal is sort of trying to reclaim his identity as Aam Aadmi. He's doing padyatras and things, I think, in sort of to make that kind of public connect, but doesn't seem highly effective.
If just to say on this chief minister's residence thing, like I do think it's damaging that the AAP hasn't countered it reports are the gospel. We know how that works, right? We've seen that in the past. But if you really wanted to dispute things like, did you really spend 90 lakhs on curtains? You could have just said, boss, this is a lie. This is what we actually spent. So the narrative from the AAP isn't that this is, I don't know if I'm allowed to say bad words here, but crap.
Have you met Abhinandan swears like a sailor.
Okay, so all right, so maybe I can, which I couldn't on national TV, which is great. But instead, the narrative is, well, the PM wears this 10 lakh suit and he drives in this car, etc., etc. Now, again, I don't know how much this issue will resonate per se with voters. Like, I think voters in India are generally very forgiving of people who have allegations of corruption. I think Kejriwal is hoping that he can turn this around and talk about how his schemes have been stalled. And then there's the other factor. How much will the schemes or the new sort of welfare things that are announced, how much will they impact voters? Because that seems to be now making a big difference. You're pretty much telling voters on the eve of an election that we'll pay you this much, humko vote do, and that's what's happening, right? Look what happened in Maharashtra, Jharkhand. These schemes are Madhya Pradesh before that.
That's very effective. You're right. It's worked nationally, it's worked in assemblies, and clearly all three parties have learned from that.
They all copied Kejriwal because this is his playbook, right? The whole free bus rides for women, free electricity. Everyone was up in arms at that time. And then in between, you saw how the BJP tried to turn the tables and, the prime minister leading on that, saying this is rave-D culture, etc., etc.
And they're doing
but the BJP is now, they're doing it and they're mastering it and they're not talking about rave-D culture anymore. Actually, because it works.
Some of this, before I come to Shardool, just two quick inputs here. One is that the first thing which actually brought Arvind Kejriwal to that, at least the consciousness in Delhi, was his promise of 400 units free electricity. And the thesis by quote-unquote market economists was this would bankrupt BSCS. It didn't actually. And actually, it did better than it had under Sheila Dikshit. So the economics of that free electricity, because after 400 you pay the normal rate. None of it is free. So it actually worked out. Of course, all those people suddenly shut up and of course the women's free travel. In fact, as we are recording this, Arvind Kejriwal has written a letter to the Prime Minister saying that students should be given a 50% discount of free rides in metro. And when I was in college in Delhi University, DU students used to get a bus pass.
Yes.
And you could ride free back then, not just in the U specials, even in the regular DTC buses. The red lines and blue lines you could not ride free, those are private, but all the DTC buses you could. So it's not new. And this also in many other cities and metros around the world, student passes get you huge discounts on travel, if not. And the second thing on what Nidhi said on them not defending this, saying that, look, the curtains aren't worth that much. Of course, some of the allegations that there is a swimming pool, there is a gym, of course, none of that is there. But, and this is something I've understood about campaigning over the last 15 years, having full disclosure. I was, part of the NGO. I still am actually a trustee in Arvind's NGO, which he started in 2004. And in his first election against Sheila Dikshit, I was very much involved in the campaign. the trick, not the trick, this is a gospel that all parties follow. Do not let the focus be on your issue, in the sense that even if someone's lying about, I have a head with gold in it, I should not say, oh, my head doesn't have gold in it. The focus should be, Nidhi's head has gold in it. Check Nidhi's head. Let basically the focus has to be not on you, but on the other person, if you want to take the focus away from that issue. So they all try to put something at the center, the focus, whether it's the defense or the attack, it should not be on my weak point, which in this case is Arvind's residence. The focus should be on someone else. Let them defend it and we will attack. Because that's how the media cycles play out. But Shardool, what do you make of...
Can I just jump in for one thing?
Yeah,
though? I mean, I have two things to say. One is that, but I think what the AAP or what some of its leaders have been saying is that, the defense, so to speak, is that, but this is the chief minister's house. It'll belong to whoever the chief minister is after that. And again, that is not a very compelling sort of thing to say, because when Navika Kumar is giving you a guided tour of the entire house on national television, that looks great. Like, it looks really dramatic. So just saying that, well, another chief minister will get it doesn't work. And two, the thing about freebies is, I am from a state which is built on welfare schemes. Welfare schemes are very inbuilt into the way that governments function. And I don't think any of this is new. I think perhaps it's new for certain kinds of states or union territories or whatever. But the idea of welfarism has a very, very, very long history in Tamil Nadu, where it has been widely successful and it has built societies. So it's, the fact that they're all jumping on it now and calling it rave culture and freebies now makes me really angry, because I have a huge issue with the sort of nomenclature of the word freebie. I think it's a terrible thing to do. But anyway, that is a rant.
Just to go off topic on that, because I wrote a piece on this as well. The only thing that worries me a little bit, because I agree with you that you can't look at this purely as a freebie. I think like putting money into the hands of women, for example, makes a huge difference, no matter how small the amount is, even if it's 1,500, 2,100. For a poor woman to have the independence, to have that it's her money, it's not her husband's money, that she can spend it in the way that she chooses to, makes a big difference. But my worry is that, does this in the long term, disincentivize governments from actually making long-term policy to pull people out of poverty, to improve the standard of living? Because if political parties begin to think across the board that all we need to do is announce a scheme for women or XYZ just on the eve of an election, like in Maharashtra, and turn things around in 4 months, then sure, we'll just do that. So that's a separate aside, in terms of long term, where this is going.
Yes.
Yeah. So a lot of things. One, I'm not trying to defend them, but I think BJP and PM have now stepped back from their Revdi statement they started a couple of years ago.
They have.
Now the PM is saying that we will not discontinue this, because the reason is, whether you like it or not, but the scheme started by Arvind Kejriwal and the AAP government have created a constituency for them, which is like the poorer section of society. They have a stable vote there. We have seen it now for multiple elections. But related to elections, like we're talking in the upcoming elections in Delhi, Delhi is sort of a solidified state where if you ask people, there are many surveys which show this, that in their memory, who's their favorite CM? It's still Sheila Dikshit. They still talk about Sheila Dikshit. But Congress doesn't get seats. In past 10 years, they haven't. And this is, I think, the basket case of public voting differently in Lok Sabha and Vidhan Sabha elections. Because they gave clean sweep to BJP in Lok Sabha, and they have given, at least for past 2 times, clean sweep to AAP in Vidhan Sabha elections. So this is a very bifurcated state, or you can say very politically aware state, whichever way you want to put it. One thing more, BJP, while being organizationally strong, like I'll come to AAP later, they do not have a face here. And some people say, like, you don't have a clear answer to this, but some people say the reason is the central leadership doesn't want a popular face in Delhi because it gets more media highlight. By the nature of the city, it's a political capital. The others say the reason is, many people say the reason is that there is infighting in BJP, the Delhi cadre. It doesn't let one leader come up. Whatever the reason may be, BJP has been regularly struggling to find, like Virendra Goyal was so long ago. And that he was not the leader. Vijay Goyal, I'm sorry.
Vijay Goyal,
Goyal, sorry. I even forgot the name. He was that long ago. There has been no face in Delhi. And one last thing, what Jayashree was saying, that they are trying to focus on Arvind Kejriwal and this quote-unquote Sheesh Mahal issue because the visuals, like she said, like the media also has a role in it. The visuals are much easier to distribute and they're easy to sort of explain to people that look what he has done. The other issue, which on paper is a bigger issue, for which Arvind Kejriwal and many of his colleagues went to jail, liquor policy. Yes. So they're not talking about it that much.
Yeah, because everyone got bail in that. And of course, and I think like Arvind had in one of the India Today events on stage, when one of the anchors was haranguing him, he said, okay, tell me what is the allegation? She could not even tell him what the allegation is. You see, there was just a lot of noise. Just tell me the specific allegation. What is the allegation? Who has made money where? She had no idea. So I think that is, but this not having a face, there are two issues with that. And of course, this is my conjecture and speculation. Because I think just 2-3 days ago, even in the Indian Express, there was a piece that apparently, some sections want Smriti Irani to be the face. The thing is, the Delhi Chief Minister face that comes up every now and then, that this should be the face, is a former cabinet minister or someone who sees himself or herself as cabinet minister level. For them, Delhi Chief Minister is stepped down. Right? So they do not want to be the face. And also, if you lose, then the Sushma Swaraj thing, right? She was made the face of Delhi and she was very unhappy. And, it kind of, then after that, it was on her. She lost, she's not popular. So no one wants to take that risk. And if you put someone who doesn't have, so much to lose, like a Parvesh Verma or the other kind of Biduri type people, for them, of course, it's a step up. But then they are not of the stature of Arvind Kejriwal. So it's this catch-22. Like, so if they put someone as Smriti Irani as the face of Delhi, or they put, like the fact that Kiran Bedi got decimated here, no one wants to take that risk. So I think that's why they don't have a face, because the potential face has to be someone big enough to take on Kejriwal. And if they choose someone big enough, that big enough person sees themselves as a cabinet minister in the center, not Delhi chief ministers. So they have to.
But someone like Ramesh Biduri and all, like, what is their popularity like? I mean, is he known at all, or is he just?
Oh, he's known in Delhi in the Tughlakabad area, but yeah, otherwise he's not. I mean, he's not someone who has that kind of acceptability as a chief minister. Like, you can't, because you do. I mean, the data shows that a lot of AAP voters at Assembly are Modi voters in the center.
Yes, almost 35%.
There's a huge overlap there. So
but Abhinandan, the way the BJP functions, I just feel that if look, let's face it, there's no election committee, election committee that decides names, etc. It's a very top-down approach. The top two decide everything. So if they decide that Smriti Irani has to be the face, I really don't see how she would be in a position to say no, or not just her or anyone.
Right.
Like, if they tell you have to go and do this, I think the BJP is in a state at the moment where everyone will say, "Ji, sir."
True. Yeah, I agree with you.
But here's the thing.
But it'll be a reluctant one. Like, even Sushma, of course, Sushma.
Maybe
Sushma
reluctant, but there is no democracy in the BJP. There is no one who has the ability to turn around and say we will not do this, or to defy. So therefore, if they're not able to really find a face, it's a more fundamental problem. I think infighting may have a lot to do with it, different camps. The fact that they've been out of power for so long in Delhi is a factor. But I mean, the funny thing is, we're all talking about the BJP versus AAP. We're not even talking about the Congress, except in passing about the fact that
I was just saying that
15 years chief minister, and the Congress is not in the conversation. Like, that's crazy.
Is this Sandeep Dixit super charismatic though?
No, he's. I mean, he just doesn't have it. I think he's got.
I saw some commentator online saying the young Dixit who follows in his mother's footsteps, and I looked him up, but he's not like a particularly young.
He's not even close to young. No, but he's
not. But in India, we have this weird definition of who a young leader is. So Stalin is still our young leader.
Yeah, exactly. But I just think that the Congress, and that is where, that whole conundrum, the contradiction within democracy and autocracy being at the center of party, a democratic structure, but parties being anything but. one of the biggest weaknesses in the Congress is that everybody is a leader. You see, the Delhi Congress is one of the, I mean, if you think there was infighting in Rajasthan and Maharashtra, Delhi is next level. Everybody's out to cut the other. And Rahul or Sonia, who would have the authority at some time, say that you fall in line, either they don't exert it or they don't have that in Delhi. And that works against the Congress. And like Nidhi said, it's interesting that they're not even part of the conversation here.
So before I come to Congress, I wanted to sort of add a point to what you and Nidhi said. The funny thing is, like you said, the cabinet minister and what Nidhi is saying, whoever they tell that you have to follow, 2 points. One, the leader takes time to familiarize themselves with the whole polity, every seat, and you have to understand who's where in which seat. And the other thing, they have defanged the Delhi government themselves. It's an obvious step down. Earlier, it was just a notional one.
Correct.
Now it's an obvious step
one. Yeah.
Like you don't have power, you just have a title.
Right.
And about Congress, so this is against Congress strategy. And we were discussing, I think, sometime in Charcha, so it came into my mind then, that their strategy has been very strange in Delhi. The main person who criticized AAP and AAP government in Delhi was Ajay Makan. He kept doing it. In fact, like a couple of weeks ago, he called Arvind Kejriwal Desdrohi and anti-national, I think. So, and now when in Lok Sabha elections they merged, all that sort of work which he had done reluctantly or against the central leadership just evaporated. And now supporters of Congress don't know what's happening most of the time.
That is one of the reasons that actually, in my view, Modi is pushing the one nation, one election. It's not so much about many of the other things that are being speculated that they can rig or they can do. I think the main thing is that it'll be very difficult and untenable for alliances to happen, because at the state level, you'll be fighting against each other, but at national level, you fight in alliance. And that is just a very difficult thing to explain to your voters, that guys, at the assembly level, have a campaign. A campaign has to be a single message, the world over. Garibi hatao, achhe din, the Trump's whole thing. MAGA, make America. It has to be simple, and then that's the enemy, I'm the good guy. If you have one nation, one election, you can't go to your workers and then tell them to communicate to the rest of us that, when you do your assembly vote, we are together. We are against each other. Kejriwal's a bad guy or Stalin's a bad guy. But center, we are together. It is impossible. It will only benefit the Congress and the BJP. The main parties will benefit from one nation, one election. Everybody else will not.
And one more thing, no matter how big BJP is right now, most of the times it's sort of half of the pie in the whole election. The size of the pie is the same. But all these opposition parties share the Congress side of pie, the erstwhile Congress. And there is no one to share. Like, I think Kejriwal he was trying to sort of, gain a catchment area in BJP's pie of the electoral sort of polity. Because there is no one who shares BJP's pie. Shiv Sena was there in Maharashtra, but that was, I think, an exception. An exception doesn't make a rule. Find 3 parties all over the country who can say that we sort of overlap with BJP in the electoral base. But all opposition parties have come at the expense of Congress. So again, what you say, one nation, one election will benefit mostly BJP.
But it has moved, I think, the vote has moved to the BJP, which was not traditionally necessarily the BJP voter. So I think that vote is still fluid. I don't think one should take it for granted that will be a BJP vote. But on the, before, we have another 10 minutes with Nidhi, just want to discuss a little bit with the panel on...
Sorry, before you move that, can I just say a couple of things on
Please.
Delhi? I only had 2 things I want to say. One is that I think apart from the fact that I do think the eulogy for the India Alliance should be written and has been written by many people, I think 2 things are interesting. One is the timing of the announcement of the 8th pay commission. There's still 1 year to go for the 7th. I think it is very much, they're saying they're doing it now for purposes of efficiency and so on. But I think the timing is very sus, because I think New Delhi has 400,000 government employees or retirement government employees as part
Hello,
of it.
Election Commission, wake up, model code of conduct.
So
anyway,
very sus in general. And also, I do think I want to mention Jairam Ramesh's petition against the amendment to the conduct of election rules. See, I think it's very important. Okay, what it is saying is that before you had access to election-related documents, now they've amended it saying you can only access, I think, papers that are specified under the documents, which does not really seem to include stuff like Form 17 17C and video recordings and CCTV footage. And Form 17C is that it's a documentation which records voter turnout in every polling station, in every constituency. And I think this should be seen in the context of just, okay, it feels like it was 10 years ago, but it was just last year that the Chandigarh mayor election happened. And we saw that guy on camera tampering with, and I think the Supreme Court also said he very obviously defaced the ballot papers, murder of democracy, this and that. And also after the Lok Sabha polls, the Election Commission did not put out the voter turnout figures in absolute numbers, I think. And later, when parties petitioned to try and get copies of Form 17C, they sort of stonewalled them and said, I think one of the excuses they gave in court was there's no technical facility to scan these documents. So,
Really?
given this sort of pattern that history is very clearly showing us, it is shocking that this amendment has taken place. And I think it is important.
It doesn't surprise me anymore, though, because now I think things that we thought were just shocking or immoral or unethical or unconstitutional, everything is being normalized. And part of it, the part of the reason is because the media just doesn't ask difficult questions. I mean, shouldn't the media, the mainstream, the legacy media at least, be trying to do more investigative, in-depth reporting on, okay, because, or let's say, what is happening in the Election Commission? Because again, this is part of the problem with the opposition's narrative led by the Congress. You first, make a cry about EVMs, right? You don't sustain it. So either EVMs are bad, even when you're winning, or they're not. But I think the bigger concern is what we were just discussing is like, what is happening with voter rolls? What is happening, with transparency, even, from the Election Commission on basic things like the turnout, etc. That is, I think, the bigger concern. And that is where the opposition is just sort of falling by the wayside. And of course, the media doesn't ask questions either. I think the Election Commission today is one of the most compromised institutions in the country.
Yeah, I think it is disgraceful. And even someone who usually is so careful with his words, Dr. Qureshi, in his interview with me, he was extremely critical and unforgiving of the Election Commission. I think they have not covered themselves in glory. And even Rajiv Kumar's press conference, where he was saying, oh, this allegation is being made, he took no questions, because enough questions can be asked about the conduct of the Election Commission. Yes. But he just holds this press conference, and like Nidhi said, the legacy media has become like a PVC pipe. यहाँ से आप पानी डालो, वहाँ से और निकालो. मतलब बीच में कोई filter नहीं है, कुछ, whether we fact check anything, no, nothing. Modi will make a speech, no matter whether he's inaugurating a water treatment plant, whether he's doing musings, they'll just, nothing. I think it's a disgrace, and that is where the media is failing. And in fact, I want to talk about our story, this story that we did on Ashwini Vaishnav, who is the railway minister. He is the information and broadcasting minister. We have done an investigation into his remarkably successful companies that, go up 100 times, 200 times in a few years. And we have made no allegation. We have just put the facts out from information available in the public domain through Ministry of Corporate Affairs website, companies he's enrolled in, where the loans to those companies came, what is the nature of business to do, how the revenues grew. Newslaundry has been investigated for 4 years for a lot less. And even till today, I get income tax notices. I have hearings in court. So all those wonderful people in the Ministry of Finance and tax authorities who are investigating us, once you've done investigating us, it's been 4 years, maybe you may need to take another 2-3 and your valuable time. I think it might be useful to investigate some other large companies also which are connected to your, but these people will be given awards at Indian of the Year by so-and-so TV. No one will investigate their companies. So rather than legacy media doing any investigations, and they have 300, 400 reporters, no investigation. Matlab investigation, I can put reasonable money on the table and tell you that you ask some of the senior reporters in quote-unquote journalists in these broadcasts, read a balance sheet or download the incorporation certificate or whatever is the publicly available material on Ministry of Corporate Affairs. They won't even know how to do it. They haven't been taught to investigate.
But I mean, why do you-
meanwhile,
I
they will
mean, I
have
mean, of
they will have
course-
events, they will have awards to these people, but no one has the guts to do an investigation, get into their companies rather than only investigate, the media itself.
I think broadcast media is, of course, I mean, it's a disgrace today. But even, the print media, it's really not that.
I agree.
It's not that much better, right? And when you pick up a newspaper, what's going to be buried by who, and what will be played up by who now. And so I think legacy media across print and broadcast is facing that crisis. And forget investigation. I think just basic fact checking, just basic asking questions. No one's doing that. And therefore, institutions like the Election Commission, which have a responsibility, I think, to go out of their way to tell voters that we are transparent, to show that transparency, not just say it. So they get away with it.
Yeah.
Because there's just no one holding them accountable and nobody cares. So even your story, it came, it went, and it'll be, no one's going to follow it up. No one's going to ask questions. No one's going to, there's no tune, as they say. Aage chalo.
In fact, just to add to that point, the basic problem is that legacy media, like print, you rightly said, one is, of course, the advertising model. And this is where I say, scan this QR code. We don't depend on government ads. We don't depend on any government's ads, whether it is a state government or the central government. And you see print and broadcast is full of, in fact, FM is full of Kumbh ads by the UP government. I mean, the revenue that is going into all media because of Sarkari advertising. I mean, that is one of the key things. So you can scan this QR code and contribute and pay to keep news free. But the absence of investigation, and Nidhi, what's happened is, our generation, when we got into the profession, and this is what I say whenever, in fact, today I'm going to be speaking at the event at IIT. The first boss you have is what is normal for you. That is normal. Whether it is normal or not in the wider context, you think that this is how things are.
Yes.
And that is what you take over. Then everything else that's the reference point.
Yep.
I'm not saying was any golden age in Indian journalism, but at least the immediate bosses we were responding to were reporters. They were not Sudhirs who have been to Tihad on allegations of extortion. They were not people like the primetime anchors that you have who go around saying ye jihad, who have been fined 20 times for communal remarks. They were not those people. They may have been good, bad, ugly, but they were journalists. To the generation that is in their late 20s to early 30s today, for the last 10 years, what have they seen? And I think that is why we've lost. Japan mein thi na, lost generation jo bhi jahan bhi thi. So in journalism, India has a lost generation. That generation doesn't know what journalism is. It's not their fault. I was seeing this video. Sorry, I was seeing this video of this boy, and I felt so bad for him. Someone had put it, mockingly. He's a Republic journalist who wants to question Gautam Gambhir. I have no sympathy with Gautam Gambhir. I think he's such a sada hua, always dukhi, angry man. You make him the coach of Indian team, even they will be sada hua, dukhi. So first of all, make someone who's happy and upbeat. That's very important for morale building. Coach has a lot to do with morale building. He's driving out and the Republic guy is saying, one bite, sir. I haven't had breakfast since morning. I've been sitting. One bite. And he's running around. I haven't had breakfast. He said that 3 times. I was like, buddy, you're young. You don't have to not have breakfast and lunch and beg this guy for a bite. And you should tell your boss that, and your bosses should say that. He's shouting that and saying, give me a bite. Not because I'm a journalist.
His editor would have put pressure on him.
Exactly. And I'm saying, don't do that. And editors should be saying, dude, you don't have to do that. You ask Gautam Gir, bolna hai, bolo nahi to aage chalo.
Well, that's the problem with, how it's deteriorated. And like when you speak of a lost generation, I look at political reporters today, at least of this generation. They don't know anything except the WhatsApp group that some minister or the PMO or the
I have seen those groups.
I've seen, exactly. So they don't know, they think that is political reporting. I mean, there was a time when, we could go into government buildings, we could walk into offices of ministers, bureaucrats, talk to them off the record, try and figure out. I mean, of course, journalism is not just about access to those corridors, but the fact that you could try and understand why a certain policy was being framed in the way that it was. We get a lot of shit. Now that I can say that, I feel really good. We get a lot of shit. Oh, you guys used to travel on the Prime Minister's plane and it was like this lovely, thing where you all drank and then went on a holiday. Basically, that's such crap, because it wasn't. I mean, firstly, we paid for our own stay, etc. The plane was going anyway. They would take us. I do feel in hindsight, it would have been good if everyone just paid for their ticket to travel on that Air India plane as well. That would have been even better. But chalo nahi tha. But those trips were really hard work. Those trips were background briefings where you talk to the NSA, the foreign secretary, the prime minister. There would be press conferences. You really had access. And to be able, you could do like a 2-hour long background briefing with the NSA, whoever it was at that time, and just like understand, what's happening. But you just don't have that kind of. I mean, this is now like a badge of honor that we're not talking to anybody. Actually, you are, but you're doing it on your terms, where you're basically just planting stuff and they're just regurgitating it.
Terms, it's just become dictation. It's gone to a. It's not just. But hold that thought. I just have one. Point I want to know your view, Nidhi, of, I have certain criticism of the old school as well, and I'll tell you specifically what that is, but I think Jayashree want to say something.
Look, I've been a journalist for 15 years. You guys have been journalists for much longer, but I think what we call as this amazing period was also the fact that we're very okay with the idea that, you have to work 19 or 20 hours a day. We're like, because we did it back in the day. This is what the job demands. The job should not demand it. I think I do think younger people today have better vocabulary to sort of push back on those things. But just with respect to young people and this lost generation, so the more young people I meet, which is not a lot, it's basically through like cousins and cousins of cousins and who sit around at family events. And they're just like, we do not consume the news. We do not read newspapers. We do not read websites. We do not watch news channels. For them, they get like their source of news is stuff like Instagram. It's in shots. It's quick sort of things, because it's not. For them, they recognize that the model itself is so flawed and it's dying literally in front of them. So it's just like, why would we pay to read a newspaper or watch a television channel when we don't have to? And it's like, it's such a huge missing link for me. Like the fact that you are so detached from this sort of environment of news and news gathering and all. But for them, it's just like, we don't see value in it. We don't see a purpose in it. And for me, that is very sad. I mean,
right. Before I come to Shardool and Nidhi, want to welcome Vivek Kaul is in the studio. We will just get to the dollar and other stuff. But if you want to weigh in on what we're talking about, please feel free. And before you've just come, can we get you green tea, filtered coffee, hot water, or
hot
nimbu
water
pani?
and filtered coffee would be great.
Black?
Yeah, black.
Okay, black coffee and hot water coming up. But Shardool, say your piece, then I'll come back to Nidhi.
Yeah, so just one point. So, I am sort of a lateral entry into journalism, right? I don't have that much experience of journalism per se. Life, bahut hai. So, I have seen, since I was a kid, this paparazzification of TV journalism. The ethical values have never been a strong point of India in general.
Yeah.
The professional ethics and we talk about conflict of interest.
Sure.
People generally don't understand it. But this paparazzification has been very obvious. You can see it happening if you are my age, in early 40s or late 30s. And the other is this. But this paparazzification is not limited to journalism. I'm talking about the attitude. The very inculcation of the idea or just the thinking that we don't have to agree to powerful people all the time.
Yeah. And that's not disrespect.
The disagreeableness. It's just being agreeable or disagreeable in general.
Yeah, I think that's a big problem. But Nidhi, here's my main issue with the journalism that we miss. Not that it was perfect. And even at that time, and that is one of the reasons Newslaundry was formed. Newslaundry was basically formed as how can you not be accountable to anybody? And this is something that even people who are really liked and respected in journalism, other than Madhu, who was, I think, and still is so irreverent, I just find it amazing, that we are not answerable. This whole line that we are not the story, and I get where it was coming from. But I think it was a lack of self-awareness. And I've heard a lot of people saying that, including you, Nidhi. And I don't think it came from a bad place, that no accountability. But I think there was a disconnect that the media, if it's the fourth pillar of democracy, is also answerable. And there was the old school, I will not name that very senior journalist who last week I met at an event. And that person started giving me gyan about, this is not journalism, that is not journalism, this is being anti-Modi is not journalism. So I said I respectfully disagree. And I put my point across. And this person was like, "Tu badi badtameez se baat karte ho." And I was being badtameez.
What is badtameez?
You're very ill-mannered. Or basically, badtameez is, it wasn't ill-mannered. It was, how dare you talk to me? How dare you disagree? And the problem with that generation is they thought disagreement was disrespect. They had not got used to.
I
was
think
like,
I can guess who you meant.
I was like, you think I'm badtameez right now? I said, no, I was not badtameez, but now I'll tell you. I said journalism is where it is because your generation is a generation of cowards. Each one of you was and is a bloody coward. So don't teach me how to do journalism. I'm not a journalist. I'm an entrepreneur. I was a journalist 4 years of my life, from 1995 to 1999. When I was a reporter, I used to go with a mic. I used to ask Sushma Swaraj stupid questions, Pranab Mukherjee stupid questions, and there were no cameras. There was only one camera, Aaj Tak camera and Doordarshan camera. So we had access to everybody. But after that, I have not been a journalist. I have been a businessman, and that is what I am till today. But the fact that that generation thought they were not answerable or accountable to the public, even the very well-meaning decent ones, there was an arrogance which has been broken in the most brutal way now. And it did not have to be like this.
I don't disagree with you. I think, see, accountability is at various levels. I think you're absolutely right that that's a generation that basically felt that, the world revolves around them. It stops and ends with them and their point of view. There's no room for disagreement anywhere. Part of the problem is accountability within an organization. If you have good editors and good proprietors, and it's as we know, a very flawed model that we have in newsrooms in general, which is another debate. But if you have accountability within newsrooms, that makes a difference no matter how senior the person may be. Accountability to the public today, I think that's a bit of a double-edged sword, because what is the public today, right? If you're going by social media, then it's a very skewed space where there's so much toxicity and trolling and bullying, that goes on. So I don't know if that's necessarily, I don't know how to define that. But there's also accountability institutionally.
I can, but I'll come to that later. I have a very specific idea of what it is.
I'm just saying that, for example, you talked about the fact that so-and-so anchor who said this jihad, that jihad got fined 20 times. What are those fines?
Yeah.
What, 1 lakh? 50,000? Who gives a crap?
Exactly.
That's nothing. So you have these bodies which are like the NBDSA, etc., who have, you please go find that channel 5 crores and fir baat karenge.
Yeah, it should hurt them. But by accountability, I'll give you a simple example. We started something called Media Rumble, and it was a big tent. We've had Piyush Goyal on it. We have had Kanchan Gupta on it. We have had people, Kapil Sibal on it. We have had former INB ministers on it, and they were questioned, Manish Tiwari. But it is like when we invited anchors from Times, they told me we will not be allowed to have a conversation among your peers. What I'm saying is, at the Jaipur Lit Fest, about 3 or 4 years ago, I was on a panel with another prominent anchor. And I got to know that he said, I'm on the panel, Abhinandan, can we change? So they were told, no, he cannot change. He said, okay. Last minute, he didn't show up. I'm not saying you have to go on Twitter. Just have a conversation where someone can ask you questions. Nobody wants to be asked. Like when me and Madhu bumped into Arnab in Khan Market, and we ambushed him with a camera, just like Republic channels used to. He was like, kya kar rahe yaar? Come on yaar, come on yaar, kya kar rahe? Come on Madhu, come on Abhinandan, kya kar rahe ho? I was like, hello. When you guys do, you are answerable as well, right? So I'm not saying that's it, but just that we will not answer any questions is something. If you send them a questionnaire, we've done media reporting across channels, across media houses. No proprietor or promoter will answer. They believe that they are not answerable. And that arrogance, unfortunately, is broken by someone like Modi. It should have been a self-realization that said, we are also answerable. But before we move on and say...
No, and my thing is specifically is that they won't answer if you send them questionnaires, especially for media stories, because they're like, we're too big to bother with this bullshit. And then when you publish the story, then they send an email saying, what the fuck, you never got in touch? We were like, we did get in touch. We sent you a question and the questionnaire is sitting in your inbox. But then they'll be like, oh, now
That's
we
a valid
will
point.
to give you a comment.
I have to exit because I have another meeting to go to. But this is fascinating because actually there are about, I can think of 5 other conversations he could have had just emanating from all of this.
We should actually on media, we should have a round table. But thank you so much for joining us, Nidhi. All the best. Look forward to seeing you on some platform or the other, wherever it is. And have a great weekend.
Back on Decoder for Delhi elections.
Abhinandan, the recommendation.
Oh yeah, before you go, we need a recommendation that would enrich the lives of our listeners.
Recommendation for?
It could be a OTT, a film, an article, anything. Anything that you think is worth our listeners' time.
Well, this is so random, but like Seinfeld is one of my favorite shows of all time. I think it was one of those underrated shows outside of America because everyone was focused on Friends. But I think it's still on Netflix and you should just go back and watch all the seasons because it's irreverent and it's genuinely funny. And I think we all need a little laugh. We need to just switch off and Black Warrant right now.
Right.
Yes.
On Netflix in Hindi. Great show. So I think these are 2 things that I can think of. And I think lives can be enriched by just putting your feet up.
Yes. Thanks so much. Have a
See
good
you
day.
guys. Thank you.
Bye. Yeah, I'd just like Vivek to come in on this before we move tracks into hardcore finance and economics, etc. Do you have anything to say on what we were discussing? Because you also had a long career.
I think, and I'll be honest, I have stopped consuming all forms of media, including newspapers.
Only news media.
News media, social media, obviously one.
Entertainment media.
My point's limited to news media. And what, in my experience, and this has happened in the last 3 to 4 years, my thinking has actually improved because my ability to see things without getting involved with all the noise out there has just gone up. And also, when you pay for my comment in this case is limited to, let's say, the news media and the general news media and the business media. When you pay for subscriptions, I don't see much value, especially given that now it's in my mind. The gap between paying for entertainment like something like a Netflix or paying for something, some news media organization, that gap is no longer there. It's broken down because it's the same time that I don't have, we all have 24 hours during the day.
And also it's just one delivery pipeline. Earlier it was for entertainment, you went to cinemas, for news you watch TV, for this.
And because what happens is, when you pay for subscription, you don't get anything that really adds, for the lack of a better word, any value, right? So, this is not, I'm not talking about Newslaundry.
You're most welcome. Of course, man can have different views.
So,
that's the whole.
So I'm just generally, so when you pay for subscription, you don't get much of a value add. So in my profession of writing primarily on business and economics, I would rather pay for a good economics database and get access to that data and that then go around forming my view. So there isn't much of value that the news media sort of
in general gives.
And also what happens is that if there is anything of value that does get published, that anyway gets downloaded and passed around. So and also how many subscriptions can you sort of take on? It's not about money. It's basically about the fact that there is only so much time, right? So you can't, like in the good old days, I would buy 8 newspapers, right? And then at least go through them. But now it's not, it's simply not possible to have like 10 subscriptions and...
it's a combination of things, but I'll come back to that later. You were saying?
One thing, that not asking questions is a very Indian value. If you remember the first letter I wrote you, it's an Indian family thing. Just follow what's being said. Don't ask questions. And that has...
From the most primary unit of our society, it's taught to us and then it keeps traveling outward, which to RTI also, there was a response, not by the court or who or the Election Information Commission, that RTI is not there just to satiate the curiosity of someone regarding, I think, the Modi's...
Modi's degree.
Of course it is. You are... that's
and the thing is, it has only been sort of actualized in media. like Indian values are being actualized. So you shouldn't be sort of like surprised by this. Like this, since this government had come, and like media's job is to ask questions to any government. But this government is about Indian values. So you shouldn't be sort of surprised that Indian values are being realized in media space. And the
That's
other thing
a lovely
is,
point. So,
and Jayashree talked about public, right? Like Jayashree or Nidhi said that who's the public. But as far as I understood before coming into media space, it was not about public. You don't have to agree with everyone. It should be in public interest.
Yeah, forget agree with everyone. Look at within Newslaundry, how much Jayashree and I disagree with on so many issues, especially when it comes to our economic thinking. How much, Raman, Manish and me have disagreed on this very table. I think that the sense that you can disagree and still be friends was not there in media. For example, some of my old friends who I've known for decades, and I've said this before when Newslaundry had just started, we did something critical. Niku, how dare you? What? I was like, chill out, yeah. Fucking you don't agree, come sit and tell me I don't agree. And we've had Jaggi on this table. I mean, I don't call Jaggi anymore because he's gone too far and then it just becomes this,
acrimonious, yes.
Yeah, but we've had people who have disagreed with, who've been friends for decades, yeah. So
I came to this organization because I've spent my life disagreeing with people around me.
Yeah, so I think that fundamentally was a problem with old school journalism. Yeah. But before we move on to the dollar, etc., I have too many subscriptions, but that is also because this is my job. Yeah. So I have to keep chartering stuff. And no matter how much one starts depending on this, my morning chai with 3 newspapers, is, I just can't break that habit unless although it's so unwieldy and kabhi aise ho jata hai, kabhi waise ho jata hai, kabhi wahan rakho, lekin that habit is, but the new generation doesn't have that habit.
No, so I skipped doing the newspaper reading in the morning for a bit because I was like, well, it's online. I can read it anyway. I'm going to come across the news, but you really aren't unless it's sort of laid out and I read my 3 papers and then I feel like I've
also dissected why that happens. Because when the newspaper is open in front of you, you have a photograph here, I can travel. Okay, that's a headline. I don't have to, like when I'm on this, I can only see one headline at a time. When I'm reading the newspaper, I can see like 4 or 5 and it just, it's that scanning gaze. I think that experience.
I feel like my brain's gone insane sometimes because I was reading the Times of India the other day and there was this very irritating story on artificial intelligence and I hate anything to do with AI. And then my brain was telling me, don't look at it too long. Otherwise, the algorithm will show you more stories like that. And it's a bloody newspaper. Like you sort of mix up. I think we're online so much that it just sort of bleeds into my reading of like...
One last quick thing and I'll just tell Vivek because we actually carried out a brief survey among our audience, our paying audience, because we've got a database of about 100,000 people who have at some point or the other paid Newslaundry and News Minute. And then there are certain active subscribers who are still there, certain who've lapsed and they haven't renewed. So we did a combination of a survey to a sample size that why do you subscribe? Exactly, what you were saying, that is it value you're extracting? Is it because you believe journalism should not be funded by it? Yeah, and it is interesting to see how the reasons for people subscribing are very varied. Yes. Eventually, to cross that critical mass, Vivek's point that it has to be about, I have to get some value out of reading this. Yep. But the critical mass to keep something afloat, like Newslaundry, we are sustainable by subscribers only. The critical mass actually is of people who are approaching the problem from the other side, Vivek. It's not what am I getting. They said, can a democracy survive without a free media? No, it cannot. That's a basic answer. Can a free media be funded for oligarchs and sarkari ads? No. Therefore, I have to step in. That is why our first campaign and our primary campaign till date is, if you believe in democracy, subscribe. Which is why earlier, now we have about 25 to 30% of our stuff behind a paywall. Earlier, we had nothing behind a paywall. So it wasn't like you were breaching a paywall to consume something. However, when we put Hafta behind the paywall for the first time, suddenly it went up like 8-fold. That means Hafta had become a habit-forming thing. And people said, okay, now I want to subscribe to get just that. And then slowly, we got about 15-20%.
Yep.
But I think the real problem is, I think there will always be that sliver of people who believe that they should pay for media. And that sliver is enough to sustain a news organization. And that, pipeline of news and investigations can support an ecosystem. But the real challenge, I think, in our time is going to be the clutter that you're talking about. Kitne aap maintain karoge?
Yes.
That clutter is the, I think, problem that has to be solved going forward, which hopefully between alliances like we have with News Minute, hopefully we'll have some other website, that one subscription you can access us all is, I think, a possible solution. But that is a problem on an
I think इसमें एक और बात ये है कि I don't think, I mean, you are thinking clearly, but I don't think media organizations are thinking like this. Because typically what tends to happen is, again, this is from limited evidence of following business media. So they tend to put anything that is half decent behind the paywall. And if you go on, like yesterday, if you went on to any media organization, any business media website, all day Saif Ali Khan was on the main page. Now, I have no problem with that. I mean, that was the news of the day. But then, how do you attract subscribers? Because ultimately, subscribers also need to see, Saif Ali Khan is everywhere. Now, why do I need to go to a business media website to read upon Saif Ali Khan? I mean, someone like someone like a Midday, let's say, a very Bombay newspaper, would do a much better job of it.
Right.
So I don't think that realization is there among media guys. And I think there is another problem. And I mean, I've said this in private to a lot of people, but I think this is the right time to sort of talk about in public. See, what has happened is, and please, I mean, if you disagree with me, I mean, please burst my bubble here. See, what has happened is over the years, most media organizations have been run by former FMCG executives, right? Without taking names, you and I know who these guys are. Which was pretty good up until, it was about branding, it was about marketing, it was about going and getting the advertiser who basically paid for the organization and not the guy buying the newspaper, right? But now what has happened is, if the idea is to sell subscriptions, what are you basically selling? You're basically selling a reading habit, right? Bhai padho, right? Don't just scroll, please read. The guys selling this reading habit themselves don't have a reading habit. So how do you go about, ultimately, how do you understand that this is something that can sell or this is something that cannot sell? Because you yourself are not reading, right? So you have now, obviously what has happened is because everyone's gotten into the conferences business. So it is not like mattering, it doesn't matter to them, at least as of now. But ultimately conference business is also low-hanging fruit, right? How many organizations can that sustain? And it's not scalable. Of course, it's not
हमने किए इतनी बड़ी-बड़ी conferences. आप एक कर सकते हो साल में. अब you cannot do 10.
Then you can't run an organization, right? You can't have both parallelly. Also, there is a disconnect at the heart of the business model, wherein if you are in the conference business and if you are in the subscription business, the twain don't meet. If you're in the conference business, you obviously need politicians, you need all the good big businessmen to come to you, all the big money, what I call people in the business of managing other people's money, right? The fund managers, the stock market guys. So, and if you are in the value add business, which is the subscription business, you have to be critical of these guys at some point of time.
And that doesn't come together.
And that doesn't meet again. So how do you sell subscriptions then, right?
And not just meet, Vivek, I'll tell you from, the Media Rumble being such a big event where Piyush Goyal has come. So once it slowly emerged what Newslaundry does, not only do people not come, even people
don't come.
People will come. Janta abhi bhi aa jayegi. Speakers will not come because they will be
then associated with your brand, huh?
The bloody advertisers will not come. They will say, boss, I cannot be seen standing next to you. So that is...
Also, there is a third problem. Like, when you're selling a conference, okay, so let's say some advertiser comes in and he gives you whatever, 50 lakhs, crore. I mean, I don't know what the going rates are. So you get that in, one point of time with some effort, you get that money, right? And your expenses for a 5-star hotel or a good conference hall, etc., are obviously lower than the money that you're getting through advertisers and the people who are attending the conference. Now, the problem is the subscription that you are selling. आप जो subscription बेच रहे हैं, वो आप कितने का बेच लोगे? 2,000 का बेच लोगे साल का, 4,000 or whatever. Now, compare this, the effort involved in getting like a 50 lakhs and the effort involved in getting so many of these 2,000 rupee subscriptions. So what is a marketing manager going to do?
Prioritize.
So no one is essentially interested in large organizations.
And it's very different skill sets. I mean,
it's obviously. Exactly. So you have to have, and also let's say there are different people doing it also. But ultimately, the guy who's, the top guy will see, this is the money coming in from here.
Cost benefit analysis.
And I mean, in comparison to trying to sell because selling subscriptions is a process, right? You have to recruit the right kind of, it starts from the kind of people you're recruiting.
Absolutely.
Not everyone.
That becomes the soul of the organization. In fact, Jayashree will vouch for this, and I'm sure she's sick of hearing this. For the last several years, each time we have a head of department meeting, this is the point I make. Journalists have to understand business. Otherwise,
It doesn't work.
businessmen and businesswomen will keep running journalism. And on that, I think to an extent, journalists are to blame, because in my experience, each time I try to explain the economic rational model, there is this puritanical thinking that, oh, journalists, I said, then a dukandar will come and tell you what to do.
No, because it's an ivory tower thing. No, we're so happy with the idea that we are just going to do the news because we are so important and we are so great, and we'll allow the riffraff to sort of run businesses for us. But it cannot work.
And my ongoing theme with my colleagues is that, there is this general disdain of these management types by people in the media. And I have dealt with management types. I have, done lectures at every. Today I'm speaking at IIT. Tomorrow I'm speaking at JNU. I've spoken at IIM Ahmedabad, and I've interacted with people. And over the last, 25 years, I have hired and fired maybe 300-400 people between the two companies I've run. My basic, a well-organized, person who can plan, mediocre person, which a lot of management people are, will kick the ass of a brilliant, disorganized person. And media professionals, have this, we are brilliant, disorganized people. Dude, you will be cleaned out by mediocre, organized people.
100%.
And till date, you try to get people who are quote-unquote journalists, make a simple list, maintain a calendar, be accountable to punctuality, these tucha values. Dude, hum to Picasso hain. I'll come, I'll paint when I feel like, and I'll fuck off. Then you'll have some mediocre management guy ordering you around 10 years from now. Then don't whine. So, next campaign, I would like to appeal, this QR code is for the Hindu Rashtra project. We are deploying 3 journalists. In fact, I'll tell you the journalists who will be working on this. I know Basant Kumar, Prateek Goyal and Anmol Preetham will explore these issues. They'll be going to Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh and Uttarakhand at least, and they may travel to more states. Who are the influential players driving this agenda? This entire Hindu Rashtra project has, whether it is organized and connected or it is just people working in isolation, is working at universities, on the ground, in government organizations. And we will be carrying out a very extensive series of ground reports. Here's a QR code. Please scan it. You can click in the link in the show notes below. We do not take sarkari ads because it is highly unlikely that we will get ads about the Mahakumbh while we're covering this kind of stuff. It is highly unlikely we will get ads from the Kejriwal government or even the Punjab government, which is bombarding all the broadcasters with ads these days when we are covering the Delhi elections. So if you want journalism to serve you, scan this QR code or click on the link, contribute, pay to keep news free. Now, Vivek, I have a specific question, and other than that, since we have you here and you're so rarely in Delhi, you're Bombay based, I'd like to make the most of it so the panel can also ask you questions of other issues.
Sure.
This dollar's collapse,
Rupee's collapse.
Sorry, Rupee's collapse. I think my Modi bhakti got the better of me. As Ramdev or Shri or one of these great economists had said, that when Modi becomes, it'll be 1:1 or something. But I have read a few articles, I've heard a few pods about this. One of the reasons being attributed to this, and while the RBI governor says that we are independent, there seems to be a suggestion that the government tried hard to control rather than let it free float the exchange rate, and because that is not sustainable, it will blow up in your face at some point. It is blowing up. And in trying to control that, even I think forex reserves are, 730 odd billion. It has come down to 600 and something billion. And it has had fallouts everywhere. And of course, the government can wash its hands that we have nothing to do with this. But some economists say that, of course, they do have something to do with this because of their interfering nature and lack of understanding how this actually blows up in the face. So this makes crude more expensive. This makes inflation generally. Just explain the repercussions and, in your view, why is this crisis, and is it new or is it normal? But dollar ऐसे चलता रहता है. We'll keep getting weaker.
No, I don't think it's a crisis. So, and I think what has happened is people who are looking at it as a crisis are looking at it as a crisis primarily because, the Modi government's the Modi government, or for that matter, in fact, most governments like a strong currency than a weak currency because, politically, it's always better to. So that is one part. I don't think it's a crisis at all. Is it par for course? Not really. I think what happened is that I think the RBI obviously tried to, as you said, to get get the rupee to sort of not move against the dollar for a while, and they had their reasons for it. I think one reason that really hasn't come out, and Arvind Subramaniam recently explained it in a column in the Business Standard along with a couple of other guys. So basically, in the post-COVID world, a lot of corporate India decided to borrow in dollars, okay? Because dollar interest rates were lower than rupee interest rates. Now, the risk there is that when you borrow in dollars, you also have to repay in dollars. You can't, repay in rupees. And the rate of the rupee against the dollar keeps fluctuating. So if, let's say, the rupee depreciates against the dollar, and if you've borrowed against the dollar, you have to essentially, you need more rupees to buy dollars to repay that loan. So I think that's one reason, and I mean, not the only reason, why the RBI over the last 2 to 3 years tried to ensure that the rupee sort of remains stable against the dollar. That's one reason. Now, why is it blowing up in their faces right now is because, Trump takes over as the US president in 3 days' time. Mm-hmm. And a lot of money is flowing into the US. So it's like, people...
Because he's seen as business friendly.
I mean, you can say that, whether that's business friendly or not, we don't know, that time will tell. But as of now, the market feels... because, tariffs will go up. And so if tariffs go up, obviously American businesses will benefit, profits will go up. So which is why money is moving out of, like, let's say, a market like India and going to the US. And the rupee is bound to depreciate because, so that's how it works. So I think broadly, this is the issue. So did RBI screw up? Yes, at some level they did. But, on the flip side, I mean, there is a counter argument to it as well, which, I have written about and not been very popular because it was not been very popular among people who do not like the Modi government because, see, what has happened in India is that in the last few years, I mean, the post-COVID India has been high on inflation, right? And a good part of that is food inflation. Now, which the RBI cannot control, right? RBI cannot do. So if you look at the consumer price index through which we measure retail inflation, around 40% of it is food, okay? So that 40% the RBI has no control on. So a lot of, people who, especially in Mumbai, fund managers, so they think because the RBI has no control over food inflation, so the RBI should not, raise rates or should not defend the rupee, etc., etc. But that is not how it works. They do not have control over, 40% of the basket, but they do have control over the remaining 60%, right? So one of the reasons that inflation has probably been in the 5 to 6% range is because the RBI has tried to control the non-food part of inflation. And one of the ways you do it is also by ensuring that the rupee remains stable against the dollar, because India is, we import more than we export. So when we import more than we export, if the rupee depreciates at a fast pace, so that ultimately leads to prices in rupee terms going up, right? So there are good reasons both ways. And, in a situation like this, I don't think there are very clear answers. So, people who are now talking about the whole situation blowing up are now talking about it, right? It's not like
they were talking about it.
So, so it's like, see, it's the entire, the rupee dollar equation is a very complex, complicated thing. So a lot of it becomes obvious in hindsight, which is the case now. But at that point of time, the RBI had its reasons. It had its reasons. Now, And also, the point about like a lot of people make a lot of song and dance about our forex reserves have come down. Because forex reserves are hota kis liye hai na? Because right,
this
so it's not like it's come down from 700 billion to 200 billion or something like that. So a 10% variation is okay. We don't have to like get alarmed about it. So I think it's an issue, but it's not such a big issue as it's being made out to be.
And I'd let the other panelists jump in after this question. You think there is anything to be said about the independence or the autonomy of the RBI that is an outlier, as we've seen the RBI operate in the last 2 or 3 decades, that suddenly the RBI is a lot less autonomous, and that doesn't portend well for India? Because I was actually listening to an old podcast of the Fed's independence. I think Volcker was I was reading Ruchir Sharma's book where capitalism went wrong, and he spoke about how the only Fed who actually had the guts to was Volcker, who and that entire battle between the president and in fact Nixon, pretty much.
Not Nixon, Carter.
Carter, sorry, was, Nixon threatened the Fed at that time, later. Of course, that was during Carter's time, but later there was some jhagda between Nixon and...
So basically,
is that as autonomous now in India as it was 20 years ago?
The RBI was never really an autonomous body, like, something like a Bank of England or the Federal Reserve of the United States. So, talking about Paul Volcker, I think what happened was, so he was appointed as the Federal Reserve Chairman in August 1979. And at that point of time, inflation in the US was very high. So Jimmy Carter appointed him. And he started taking, raising interest rates, and interest rates to a level that had sort of never been seen in the US during the peace era, right? And because of that, that was one of the reasons why Carter lost the elections. But then the US managed to control inflation as well. And then they saw sort of pretty much, couple of decades of non-stop growth. This was one of the reasons, not the only reason. So if you're talking about the fact that is the RBI as independent as that, no, of course not. So I'll give you an example. Many years back, I was at IIM Bangalore. I think 2014, if I remember correctly. But I'm really not sure whether the Modi government had been elected by them. My memory is not very clear. 2014, they came in, but whether I went before May 2014 or after, I don't remember. So there was this conference, which was a research sort of conference going on. And so there were people from the Ministry of Finance. One of the RBI deputy governors was also there. And there's some presentation happening. And I was trying to sort of listen to what the guy is saying. And there were 2 people sitting behind me who were constantly talking. Like shamelessly, ekdam besharam hoke. And I was like, who are these guys and what's going on? And then I realized, so one of them was a joint secretary in the Ministry of Finance, and the other one was a deputy governor of the RBI. Okay. And this joint secretary guy was telling the RBI deputy governor, aapko ye karna hai, ye karna hai, ye karna hai. You have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this, right? So that was the day that, any autonomy that I thought the RBI had, pretty much went away. That idea of that autonomy. Now, of course, that does not mean that RBI governors do everything that the Ministry of Finance tells them, right? So if you look at Shaktikanta Das, right, in the last 1 year, the kind of pressure that he would have had to cut interest rates would have been mind-boggling. But he didn't. Right. So it's not like, now whether you may agree with him, you may not agree with him. The same's true about... But there would be some resistance to pressure. Of course. There is always it would not be like the election campaign. No. So even for someone like Shaktikanta Das, who was seen, being so close to the establishment, right? So, see, I think what also happens is when these governors are in their second term, they start bothering about their legacy. How will the world see them? So I think something similar happened to D. Subbarao also in his second term. Raghuram Rajan tried being independent and couldn't. But there's a great story. I was reading the autobiography of Dr. Y.V. Reddy. I think it's called Advice and Dissent. Great book. So the second part of it deals with his days at the RBI. And he was trying to explain how he dealt with various finance ministers, basically Jaswant Singh and P. Chidambaram. So with Jaswant Singh, it was like you had to call him and you had to explain कि हम लोग why are we doing this? हम लोग ये क्यों कर रहे हैं? And he would say, हाँ ठीक है, you are the professionals, you do it. The problem with P. Chidambaram was that he obviously understood a lot of things, right? He understands a lot of things. So it was always a harder sell. So it depends. See, at that kind of level, there will always be political pressures. So you have to be smart enough, have to negotiate that. Right? It's not like, see, the finance ministry also understands at some level that inflation is very, very important. It's probably the most important political issue. If not the most, at least the second most or whatever. So they also understand at some level what is happening. Now, the problem is in the media, we like these very simple, binary explanations of everything. So even with,
And when it comes to matters of economy and finance, it cannot be more far from binary.
It cannot. It is
so
not
complicated.
possible. See, like, the entire dollar thing, we can talk on that for, 3 to 4 hours. If we have to sort of look at it in a very complete sort of way. But then that is not how, ultimately, the way I explain it is that, every media needs a headline. And that headline essentially screws up, for the lack of a better word, the analysis that follows. Because the headline in itself is a very limiting concept.
So there's a contradiction in what the headline is supposed to achieve, which is to grab your attention.
Exactly.
Which is easier
than
if it's a partisan headline. Rather than have a...
So it's like, one of the first things I was taught in journalism, and this was by Jaggi, is think of the headline first, right? Because, and it makes, in some areas, it makes immense sense. So let's say if you're writing on the, something like personal finance, okay? These are the mutual funds you should look at, or whether you should buy this kind of insurance or whatever. So in that sense, it makes tremendous sense.
News I can use for personal
because
listening.
Then it's very focused.
Right.
But the moment you start writing on the economy, there has to be, on the other hand, like, there is this joke about this US president, often sometimes attributed to Calvin Coolidge, sometimes to Herbert Hoover, that get me an economist who doesn't say on the other hand. Now, this is it's a joke, but ultimately that is how it is. An economy, any economy, even a small economy, like let's say an economy like Delhi, which is, Delhi is probably not the right. Delhi maybe a small, area-wise it might be small, but it's a large economy. But let's say something like a Jharkhand, okay? So Jharkhand is a small economy, right? But even that economy will have its will have different kind of complications, like the economy of like a city like Dhanbad, which is the biggest city in Jharkhand, and Ranchi, which is the capital, will be very, very different, right? So, so there is, you cannot, a headline cannot
capture all that complexity. So, on either of these, Jayashree, you have something to add to this?
I have some questions, but also on the question of headlines, I think Telegraph India had a very quick and cheeky story yesterday, which had a very good headline, which is why the falling value of the rupee, how the falling value of the rupee impacts the economy, as explained by Nirmala Sitharaman. Because what they did is in 2013, Nirmala Sitharaman had talked about all the issues plaguing the Indian economy, because at the time, I think the rupee was some 60 or 62 to the dollar. So they just basically reproduced her entire argument and said, here's the explanation. So,
see, at a very, at a very fundamental level, the rupee will keep depreciating against the dollar, okay?
Yeah.
For the simple fact that inflation in the US is usually lower than inflation in India.
Right.
So the rupee has to adjust for that, right? Now, obviously, this cannot happen in a linear way because there are too many other factors at work. So I think our obsession with this, dollar rupee rate is in a way quite uncalled for. Unless obviously, suddenly the rupee becomes, the dollar becomes 100 rupees or something like that, right? Like tomorrow morning you wake up and, $1 is worth 100. Then obviously, it's something we should.
That was actually my question to you, which is that, is it correct to say that a devalued currency is not necessarily a bad thing?
Of course.
Because I know textile exports are going up in Tirupur. I was reading in the paper the other day that it's dramatically increased over the past 4 months just as a result of
it works both ways, right? So obviously imports become more expensive, but if people are earning money in dollars and sending money back home to India, then obviously they get more money also, right? Their relatives here get... So it depends again, but if, let's say the rupee were to suddenly depreciate, then there would be a suddenly depreciate to like, let's say 90 or a 95 or whatever, then there would definitely be a problem. Also, because, what happens is then, speculators start coming in and they then think, want to determine the value of the rupee against the dollar. So all those issues keep coming in as well. But a general slow depreciation over a period of time is not something that...
And inevitable
is not something that should worry us at all.
Vivek, I was reading this thing about how in India now, like so the sales of fancy cars are going up dramatically, but the sales of cheap cars are falling a lot, to the extent where lots of companies are now discontinuing cheap models of cars. Like I think the cheapest model of car you can now get in India there's only one of it. I think it's the Alto or something, which is under 5 lakhs. So like, is this...
And two-wheelers.
Yeah, I think Vivek has written about this often on the K-shape.
You want a long answer or you want a short answer?
The K-shape. We have to also discuss briefly Hindenburg. So take
the short and
so you
snappy
decide what it should be.
Okay. So I'll give you a, somewhere in between, not a very long answer, but see, I think what has happened is, and I think this is a very important point that a lot of people don't realize right now, is that the Indian economy largely has been in trouble over the last 4 to 5 years. But that...
In trouble, matlab?
Trouble as in a large part of that economy, or many people have...
got left out of the growth story.
Left out, or they're probably not making as much money as they used to, or their income growth is not as much as they used to, or their income growth is not beating the rate of inflation. I mean, we can...
Yes.
So what has happened is that, but all this talk is suddenly happening now. So what has changed? So I think that is a dynamic that is important to understand, and that also answers the question that you're asking, Jayashree. See, there was this British economist called Joan Robinson who once said that whatever you say about India, the opposite is also true, because it's a large country, right? You cannot have this again. You can't have this one headline, right? So if you look at a lot of data, and as you said, I've been writing about the K-shaped recovery. If you look at a lot of data over the last 5 years, it does tell you that the Indian economy has been in trouble. Like two-wheeler sales peaked in 2018-19 at around 21.2 million units. We are in 24-25. This year, we've done around 15 million units. So we'll end up at 18 to 19, which will be lower than what it was quite a few years back. If you look at the total amount of work demanded under the work guarantee scheme, that has been robust, even in the post-COVID years. Obviously, it's not been as much as during the COVID years, but it's been higher than what it was before that. You look at the fact that...
Which is an indicator that people do not have jobs. Which is why they opt
because it's like it's a self-selection schemes. When you don't get anything else, then you approach them. You look at so many governments are now successfully launching cash distribution schemes for women, right? It's become, I think, the number one political selling point, right? So why is that happening? Why politicians are not idiots, right? They understand what is working, right? So what does that tell you? It tells you that there is trouble. If you look at something like smartphone sales, they have not been growing, not Apple, but smartphone sales have not really been growing. You look at tele-density data, it's not been growing. In fact, the data that I find most fascinating, and not many people talk about it, is that how non-suburban rail travel, which basically means long distance in railway's sense of term, has peaked in 2012-13.
Wow.
Right. So what does that tell you, right? So all these factors were telling us over the years that there are things that are not...
And a very large chunk is being left out of
whatever this growth story is. What has changed now is the fact that urban demand demand growth, I should say, not demand, is sort of moderating. And this is something that the Ministry of Finance pointed out in September in its monthly report on record. So this is not like people like me trying to, Ministry of Finance on record. Car sales, car sales had been growing over the last few years. And that again shows you the disconnect between, what we call the K-shaped growth, the disconnect between the haves and the have-nots, right? So car sales this year have been flattish, have grown by around 1% in comparison to the last year. Also, within cars, as Jayashree was saying, that, the SUV type of cars are selling more than what we used to call Maruti 800, and then it became Alto and Zen.
Common man's car,
car.
which was a very inaccurate description of any vehicle.
Yes,
but
of course. I mean, anyone who could afford a car in India wasn't really a common man, right? So that also tells you that there's a story within a story. Also, I think if you look at GST data, I mean, I think this is a point that needs to be made because every month we would see that GST data has gone up by 15%, 20%, and so in the India story is very strong. GST data this year, if you look from April onwards, has grown only in single digits except for 1 month. So that, because GST is ultimately a consumption-based tax. So that in itself tells you that there is a problem on the consumption front. The most interesting data...
Also, one point I want to ask, because that was an observation that I read, that the GST data going up is being attributed to an increase in consumption, whereas a significant chunk of it is because of inflation purely. That's a percentage.
It's inflation. Also, there is also, I think, because the government sort of cracked down on people who were not paying GST. So that, I mean, kudos to them for doing that. And at some level, it is also a function of the increasing formalization of the economy. Right. So, net, the formal part is growing up,
But that doesn't necessarily mean consumption is going up at all.
So all those reasons are there. I think the final point which sort of really got all these stock market guys talking about the economy is the fact that the sales of listed companies have really not been growing. So I can, I have some data here. So in 2023-24, and I'm looking only at non-financial firms, not banks, insurance companies, right, NBFCs, etc. So these are around 3,500 listed non-financial firms. Their net sales in 2023-24 grew by just 1.4%.
Are you serious?
So this is what that basically means is that once you adjust for inflation, the number of units of, or volume growth as we call it, actually came down. Reduced. In fact, I have another interesting data point, and this was something when I first figured this out, looked at it, it really sort of surprised me that if you look at the net sales of these companies, these firms, non-financial firms, April to September 24, net sales grew by a little over 1% in comparison to April to September 22. So this is over a period of 2 years. So what that tells you is that the formal part of the economy, the listed part of the economy is also showing signs of the fact that the economy is not doing as well as it was. I think the final point I want to make is that, why the reason that why a lot of people did not believe that the Indian economy is not doing well on the whole in the last few years is because the listed space, the listed companies, the stock market was doing very, very well, right? And there were multiple one-time reasons for it, okay? So I think the first reason was that in a post-COVID world, because interest rates were so low, so a lot of foreign money came into India in search of higher returns, and that drove stock prices up, right? So that drove stock prices up. Then secondly, what happened was that the profitability of these companies also improved dramatically, and there were several one-time reasons for it. One was the fact that in September 2019, the government cut the rate of corporate income tax. Okay. The second thing that happened was that in the aftermath of COVID, RBI cut interest rates. So a lot of these guys, the interest rate bills came down, so profitability went up. The third thing I think that has happened is that in the post-demonetization GST COVID world, an increasing part of the Indian economy got formalized. So because of that, again, the profits, sales, etc. went up. Then I think...
there was also, correct me if I'm wrong, was there a policy shift that allowed a certain percentage of pension funds to invest in the market, which was...
Yes, so that is one more...
that had more liquidity coming in, and apparently last year, a very... one trader had told me the name of that fund, which handles a huge chunk of, public funds in the US. They had announced that they are holding right now, but they will be coming in, and it did come in to foreign markets as well. So that entire,
So FII money,
it suddenly was coming in. So it was not necessarily that there was fundamentals doing well. It was cost. It was
a lot
demand,
of other
supply.
reasons at world. So revenge consumption also pushed up profits, and the fact that the government in the post-COVID world decided to spend more money, right? So that also benefited a lot of companies in the smaller and what the stock market likes to refer to as the small and mid-cap space, the SMIDs they call it, right? So all these reasons came together and pushed up sales and profitability. So now all that is unraveling, and which is why Mumbai is finally talking about what is happening with the economy, and every day you have some criticism of Nirmala Sitharaman. One final point, I find this very, very funny. That people criticize Nirmala Sitharaman. They make memes around her. One guy recently even made a full song, finance, very bad singer, but finance minister, what are you doing? This, that. Now the point is, it's very simple. Yaar. She is the finance minister of the government of India. It's not like she's running some business or
separate.
Yeah, right. So any decision that she makes is a decision made by the government of India, and a budget is finally passed by the parliament, right? So I don't see, this is basically, useful idiots being useful idiots, because they cannot criticize Mr. Modi in their head or in open.
In fact, you're right. Even many legacy media, they have no hesitation in taking, even if they don't, they let their panelists take Nirmala Sitharaman to task without countering them. But if any of them says anything, Modi, the anchor steps into, said, no, you cannot stop it over there.
I just find it quite bizarre that, she is the Minister of Finance for the government of India. It's like when Manmohan Singh in 91 carried out those reforms, it wasn't like P.V. Narasimha Rao was not involved, right?
Exactly.
How stupid can we get?
So just one thing, the over-obsession with the markets is also because people who consume the media, English media especially, people who create the media, people who are media professionals, like I can tell you specifically my case, in 2003 or 4, my CA had said there was this HDFC tax saver mutual fund. He says, you put an SIP every month there, you'll save some tax because that is tax exempt. So I had no understanding of market or investing in market. I understood the market a little bit purely because I studied as part of my big course, but I had no active involvement. So I said, sir, आप बोलते हैं तो ठीक है, बच जाएगा tax. So it went, and luckily because I used to consume a lot of American media, I had liquidated my entire portfolio in 2008 before August, September when it struck. When I saw my numbers, I was like, dude, how much money have I made?
Yes.
So I just doubled down on SIPs. Now I don't play the market every day, but someone like me makes more money every year by SIPs as long as you don't get too greedy. Salah sab डालो. मतलब हर साल डालते रहो, हर 2-3 साल निकाल दो, फिर डालते रहो. I don't care about it's going up, down, नहीं. डालते रहो, ठीक ठाक है, निकालो, फिर डालो, फिर निकालो. You end up making so much money there, you don't give a fuck about it.
No, but you are sorted that way, because most people and most men especially are looking for excitement. They need something to talk about. In Bombay, we call it KLH.
What is that?
क्या लगता है? So when you meet a...
No, but I think the obsession is because, like you said, if you leave out the financial component in the markets, it has gone down. So what is really the buoyancy that is provided is financial services, which is a bit like the tail wagging the dog. Financial services were an instrument to make life easier for manufacturing. That is fundamentally what banking should be, right? But now that pulls everything else up. And if you remove that, and I think that is why any argument you get into regarding all these WhatsApp uncles that are there on this thing, did the market do so well? Everyone's entire argument, whether the government is good or bad, is based on the market. Manmohan was so good, see how well the market. I was like, fuck, how is that the country?
No, but even talking about Manmohan and markets, the markets did better during Manmohan years.
Exactly.
It's just that the number now is like Sensex is at 75, 76, it went to 86. So those big numbers are there in their heads. No one sits down and calculates the real rate of return.
For the reasons of brevity, I'll be quick. I don't understand the sentimentality. Why would you sentimentality of dollar versus rupee? Like I am not a very financially literate person, but why would you bring sentiment into economics?
Because it's essentially it feeds into the entire nationalism.
But my point was it's stupid.
It's stupid. Of course
it's very idiotic. And I had a couple of simple questions. So what you said, I was
we have
noting
10 minutes.
So what you mean is it was overall a small section of society which drove so many industries, and that is slowing down, which is creating all this noise.
See, I'll give you a very simple example. I stay in central Mumbai, which is basically where Indian capitalism started, all textile mills of Bombay. Now those textile mills no longer exist. So there are either, 50-storied apartments or offices which have been built there, right? So a lot of these buildings have now been there for almost 10 years. Or if you walk around in the evening, the lights are not, half the flats do not have lights on. What does that tell you? What that tells you is basically that it's the same sort of people who are buying these flats and selling it to each other. It's like passing the parcel within a very small group.
And in fact, one of the analysts on Govindraj Ethiraj's podcast, I heard that the prediction is that now real estate will flatten. It grew like 20-30% in the last 2 years.
Yeah.
But now
real estate is a scam.
No, that is, that's a longer podcast. But what I'm trying to say is that, see, if you look at the fact that real estate prices have gone up, right? Now, the trouble is that, where have these prices gone up? In Gurgaon? Yes. I'm not sure about whether these prices have gone up for South Delhi DDA apartments. Not really. I mean, I know, my grandparents stay pretty close to where we are recording, and their duplex flat, which used to be worth around 4 crores in 2009, is now around 2.4, 2.5, 15 years later. So, see, the problem with real estate is that, one, there is no data. And two, the data that is available or is provided by real estate consultants.
Which is as shady as you can get.
This is like, it's like...
Which is Khosla ka Ghosla, Mr. Khurana.
The point is
sophisticated property dealers.
So, obviously, real estate prices have gone up. I mean, I'm not denying that. But then there are, again, many more nuances to that. Also, see, and it's sad that in a young country like India, some of these, the newer real estate is so expensive. So I was again reading one of these numbers that in November, one of the real estate consultants put out a report in which they said that the average price of a flat in the seven biggest cities in India is 1.23 crore.
Yeah. Ridiculous.
So to afford a flat of 1.23 crore, and I did some math around it, I mean, let's say you put in a down payment of 23 lakhs and take a loan of 1 crore. The EMI on a 1 crore loan for a 20-year loan at 9% would work out to 90,000 rupees a month. So for that, you need to be earning close to, let's say, 35% of your income goes. Yeah. So it's 2.6 lakhs a month, which is close to 31 lakhs a year. How many people make that kind of money?
Yeah.
So this entire obsession with real estate prices going up is wrong. It's fundamentally wrong at so many levels.
In fact, it's been the death of many cities. This is true for New York and Singapore also lately, because real estate has gone up to prohibitive levels. Both these cities were seen as early stage young professionals in the financial industry, which is the highest paying industry, because, Singapore is the hub for private banking, some of the hedge funds that are South Asia focused, and New York, of course, is. Because I have a lot of friends who work in finance now, because they are all 50 and around. So they are in senior to mid-senior level management. So, and they've been in Singapore. They said, but when I joined the banking industry, I chose Singapore because I could have a good life, because, we went out like good uncles. And all the places that used to be buzzing and happening were dead. He said, this is Singapore now because no young professional who enters the industry can afford. They'd rather go to Bombay. Because Singapore and New York are unaffordable. So for early stage professionals, these were young cities. And he said, and they're dying.
Yeah.
And that is purely because it is just unaffordable for someone who lives there.
So I'll just ask one more thing and then we shall move on. So when I was reading about this issue, I noticed highest growing sector was agriculture. But isn't this sort of counterintuitive to Indian government's policy, because they were trying to increase industrialization and reduce employment in agriculture?
I am not sure about whether the highest growing sector. I think the employment in agriculture.
In employment, yes.
So that's true. I think in 2018-19, around 43% of India's workforce was in agriculture. In 23-24, it was at 46%. Now, what does that tell you? It basically tells you is that there are not enough jobs going around in the non-agriculture part of the economy. Right? The second thing that it tells us is that, agriculture is not a very productive part of the economy, right? So if more than 40% of the workforce is in agriculture and the economic output forms around 14, 15, 16% of the economy, clearly it's not the most productive part. So that's because agriculture has huge disguised unemployment, wherein, if there are 10 people who can do the job, there are 20 who are doing the job, right? So which is what is basically happening. So this is one reason why rural consumption was, up until the urban story started unraveling, was slow. I mean, all the data points that I offered, this is one of the reasons why.
In fact, in spite of the Modi government doing so well in the 2019 election, when you saw the data of voting, the rural areas, even in UP, which they did so well in 2019 election, there was a very huge difference in how the urban pockets voted and how the rural pockets
I think
voted.
that was probably also because of the fact that, there was that 5 kg scheme, which was going on, and, free grains. So I think, so which is basically what it is. More people getting into agriculture is not
a good sign for economy.
Yes.
Right.
I mean, what that basically tells you is that the unemployment number doesn't tell you the right story.
Now, before I quickly move on to one quick, this has to be a very short 6-7 minute segment with Vivek. I want just Shardool to tell us, why should people contribute to our subscription, the project on the Delhi elections? Once more, the QR code, etc. will be there.
I have autism. I am never good with impromptu stuff. But can I do it in Hindi? I had something,
Please.
but it's very not formal.
That's fine.
एज ए पब्लिक शिकायत बहुत करती है कि मीडिया काम नहीं करता है ना, कि मीडिया वाले घटिया हैं और बकवास करते हैं. भाई अगर मुफ्त में बकवास ही मिलती है, अगर कुछ अच्छा चाहिए तो पैसे देने पड़ेंगे, और दिल्ली के लिए इसलिए देने पड़ेंगे क्योंकि यहाँ सरकार बैठती है. आज से नहीं, आई थिंक पिछले 2500 साल से. तो जहाँ सरकार बैठती है वहाँ के चुनावों में अगर आपको ढंग की रिपोर्टिंग चाहिए तो थोड़ा सा रोकड़ा खर्च करना ही पड़ेगा.
ज़्यादा नहीं. And we have 99 rupee option also. Jayashree, you have a more compelling reason, because as Chennai,
I've written a newsletter on this, which is going out tomorrow. But basically, it's this: that yes, I know a lot of people. I get a lot of people asking me, why do you care about a Delhi election? At the end of the day, it's just a municipal corporation. We don't really care, but it does matter because what happens in Delhi has implications to the rest of India. Now, the thing is, every day at Newslaundry, I feel like we get dozens of messages where people tell us, oh my God, this is happening in my neighborhood. There's this instance of corruption, of violence, of assault, of environmental degradation. And they're like, they all have one question: will you please report on this? And the thing is, it is incredibly heartbreaking for journalists to have to make choices on whether you can tell this story or if you can tell something else. And since we're now committed to Delhi and we're on the ground and we want to be able to do as much as possible, if you contribute to our funds, we can tell all the stories possible without having to make decisions between what we have resources for and what we do not. So if you contribute, we can do it all. And you just have to sit and pay. We will be the ones doing the work.
So before we close and get everyone's recommendation, this Hindenburg closing, I haven't read the detailed, I believe the
founder put out a note.
Yeah, he put out a note that, why we're doing this, etc., etc. And of course, the broadcast media went wild on prime time, showing this is a validation and it shows that it has nothing to do with the other. He made his money and fucked off. But what do you make of the pressure on Adani? Was Adani's so-called scrutiny and the stock price crashing only on account of Hindenburg, or do fundamentals of a company, whether being investigated, does that come home to roost whether Hindenburg puts out a report or not?
See,
because the Adani shares have gone up, depending on Adani Greens or the other one, between 14 to 19%, as NDTV very prominently reminded us about 100 times yesterday.
So, I'll give you a very simple example. Okay, at the time Hindenburg put out its report, the first one, I think other than one mutual fund, prominent mutual fund, no one else really had investments in Adani stocks. Okay. So what does that tell you? See, I am no fundamental analyst. I don't do stock level analysis. So I don't understand whether, this company is worth it or that company is worth it. Like you, I also largely stick to SIPs and I buy some banking stocks because I sort of understand that space a little better than. So the very fact that the Indian institutional investor, other than LIC and this one mutual fund, would not sort of touch the different stocks of that company, of that conglomerate company is not the right word here. So that in itself tells you tells you the story. Now, see, the problem is that, again, a lot of retail investors are not able to sort of differentiate between nationalism and investing. And especially when being nationalistic has sort of worked in their favor in the recent past. So, I mean, so if you look at a lot of PSU stocks went up in the last few years, now they're crashing. So, see, these are, again, it's complex. Investing is a very complex business if you want to do it correctly. I mean, if you just want to follow the herd, it's the easiest thing in the world. So, yes, yesterday it rallied because, Hindenburg decided to shut down. And I think if you read the letter that I think Nathan Anderson put out, so he obviously, he's moving on. But one thing that which he did not say, and I think that makes if you think about it, makes a lot of sense. See, Hindenburg was in the business of short selling, right? They were not in
that was their revenue model.
Right. Short selling is the toughest way to, not one of the toughest, but the toughest way to make money through investing. And you cannot, anyone, even the biggest short sellers tend to sort of go bankrupt after a while. So this guy obviously is a smart guy. He's understood that, we've done as well as we have for the while that we have. But, someday we are going to get it wrong and then go...
Yeah, kaput.
Because see, there's a very basic thing. When you are investing in a stock, there is no upper limit to which the price can go. But when you are short selling it, it can only go to zero. So unless you sort of leverage it, the benefits are limited.
Yes.
So this is, I think, in my limited sense, this is the right way to look at it. That the guy figured out that he's had a good run, and now is the time to go on and do other things in life. And because there's only so much money you need ultimately at the end of the day. So,
right. Thank you. It's always a pleasure talking to you, Vivek, and I'm so glad you were in Delhi so we could get you in the studio, because it's always more fun in the studio. Me and Vivek have often discussed off and on about doing a podcast on the economy, which I'm very keen to do, but it just never comes around. Maybe at some point we can discuss and figure.
Inshallah. So
at some point it'll happen. But let's get the recommendations for the week before we say goodbye to our audience. You want to start first, Jayashree?
Yeah, I have two recommendations. The first is a novel. It's called Dead Space by Kali Wallace. For me, it's a return to science fiction. I used to read a lot of like space opera and stuff a few years ago, but then took a break. And it's a great book. It's an investigator who must solve a brutal murder on a claustrophobic space station. It's a very atmospheric read. Haha, but there is no atmosphere in space. But yeah, very good. Please read. And the second is completely opposite, but I feel like it should be recommended. This is the New York Magazine piece by Lily Shapiro on Neil Gaiman. I mean, it doesn't matter whether or not you've read Gaiman, if you're a fan of his or whatever, but it is an excruciating read in that it is so horrifying to sort of hear the detail of the accusations against him. And I know a lot of people who read the first few pages of the story and kind of gave up along the way, saying it is too hard. But the last third, I think, is where it is really fucking horrible, like the sort of things that he's alleged to have done to all these women. And he has now, I think, issued a statement saying it was consensual sexual relationships, but also you have to remember that if there is a power imbalance between a man and his employee, how does consent even come into play there? So, yeah, terrible read, but I think it's quite important. So.
Okay. Vivek?
So, I read this book recently called Gabriel's Moon by William Boyd. It's sort of spy fiction set in the 1960s, but not the kind of spy fiction that people usually read. Very literary, and I really enjoyed it. The other book that I would like to recommend is called, another British author called Kate Atkinson. And she has an investigator called Jackson Brodie. And there's this book called One Good Turn, which I think is the second book in the series. There are 6 Jackson Brodie books out there. This is the second one. I quite enjoyed it. I also saw The Day of the Jackal, made by Sky.
The old one?
No. There is a new one on Sky, made by Sky and in India it's on Jio Cinema. And spoilers ahead, if you guys, if you haven't seen it, please don't listen to what I'm about to say. So I think for people who haven't read the book, they are likely to enjoy it quite a bit. But for someone like me who's read the book, I think the first 7 episodes were quite enjoyable, and then it sort of went haywire for me, because in the book, the entire idea behind the name Jekyll is that the guy is a lone assassin, right?
Yes.
So here they have a huge backstory about him being a family man and this and that. So ultimately, what they figured out was that they have a great story and they can't end it in 1 season. So if you had to have a second season, the Jekyll had to live, right? So that really screwed up a good story for me, because it's quite well made otherwise. So, yeah.
So just before we come to Shardool's recommendation, what you said reminds me of this one friend of mine who's a producer in Bombay, who was producing a very successful historical show, because about maybe 7-8 years ago, before OTT had maxed, historical shows are doing very well, whether it was about this Raja or, Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj or Rani Lakshmi Bai or whoever it is, So, then in the middle, his episodes, I watched a few we were discussing, they just went into, so I said, dude, there is no historical evidence of what will, he says, yeah, but next 7-8 weeks is IPL. Now during IPL, the show cannot progress because the viewership goes there. So we just keep making up shit so that when IPL is over, then we will go with historical accuracy.
No,
so till then, they just make up shit which never happened.
So there is another thing.
Story.
There is
Very
another thing. I mean, just to add to what you're saying. So these days, if you pitch something to an OTT firm in Mumbai, if one of the reasons they reject it is they say it's not a 2-screen watch.
Yeah.
So which basically means that, while you're watching the series, you should also be able to scroll on your...
It can't be so complicated that it requires all your attention.
समझ में नहीं आया क्या हो रहा है.
Did you read that thing though? Netflix is now specifically commissioning content for next year where if there's dialogue on screen, the dialogue will ensure that the character is also mentioning what they're doing. It is going to be specifically written for audiences where you're on your phone and you're sort of listening and watching on the background.
God.
So
yes, your recommendation.
So this plugs into one of my recommendations. But first one is, we've sort of quasi started a new thing on Charcha. Atul wants me to read a kavita. I was very adamant that I will not read mine until I'm good and ready. So last week I read one para of this poem. It's a very beautiful poem. तो बायां कंधा तुम और चश्मे का फ्रेम, ये है अंजुम शर्मा की एक कविता. It's a very beautiful poem about young love. So that's my first recommendation. The second is Ashwini Vaishnav's the article on Ashwini Vaishnav on Newslaundry. It's available in English and Hindi. And the third one is, I have always hated sort of Indian content in entertainment, be it Bollywood or TV, because I somehow, since I was a kid, I found it lacked the effort to make it original and interesting and creative, always, taking shortcuts like you just mentioned. So a show came last year and I sort of was not consuming content last year for personal reasons. It's named, the name is Arcane. It ended last year. There are 2 seasons and it is widely considered the best video game content ever made in show. And you should look at the animation, the writing, the music. It's awesome. Like the originality sort of pours out of seams in it. So watch Arcane.
This gaming industry is fascinating. I've never got into it, but it's bigger than the bloody film industry in the West.
Yeah.
It is
nearly
way
10
bigger.
times.
Yeah. So I have 2 recommendations. One is because we had Vivek and we were talking about the dollar. I may have recommended this in the past, but it's a fascinating podcast. It is about 20 minutes. It's called The Dollar, the Center of the World. It describes in detail the Bretton Woods Conference at New Hampshire, where the petrodollar was adopted as the reserve currency, and what a party it was, and 44 countries' representatives gathered to figure out how the world economy should move forward post-World War II, and the circumstances by which the dollar came to be adopted. So I highly recommend that. And the second is, for comic value, I would ask you to read it, although it has not been written with that in mind. Tarun Vijay, who I think he's been a member of parliament. He's a prominent RSS voice. And I'm just amazed that such a man was sitting in parliament making laws for us. He has basically written advocacy for 90 work a week. It's not bad. holidays and vacations are a colonial hangover. True Bharatiyas. Agar Hindustani ho, you never fucking take holidays. You are born to work. It is a Western concept because, of course, these guys work so hard. I mean, without, I don't want to be accused of being, body shaming or anything, but I have seen shakhas. Start off first working on yourselves, guys. You would not be able to run a mile without dropping dead. So let me quote a few lines from this. I was reading this article and I, because it's the first thing I do is read newspapers, and I kept rubbing my eyes ki boss, really, is this satire? Gujarat became preferred destination for entrepreneurs under the work hard ethos encouraged by Modi. Then he ends with the line, till then, aaram haram hai. Basically work. Then he comes up with this line. Do we remember who said the famous lines, arise, awake and stop not till the goal is reached? A saffron-robed monk who rejuvenated Indian youth. Okay, Then he has said, the vacation mania is a colonial hangover. It speaks of a mindset that was ingrained into people because of British rule. Because, when it said, do guna lagan, lagan pe nahi kaam karo. So the L&T chairman, whoever had sparked this, you have my sympathy for the first time since this debate was sparked, because Tarun Vijay is batting for you. Because if I was on a team and Tarun Vijay was batting for me, I'd abandon the team. I'd say, I give up. I'm not in this team anymore. You have to read this piece and take 5 minutes. You might die laughing. On that note, thank you, Shardool. Thank you, Vivek. Always a pleasure. Thank you, Jayashree. Thank you to our producer, Prashant. Thank you, Priyali. Thank you, Anil. And thank you, those who've been contributing to our NL Sena projects. The QR code is flashing in front of you. Do contribute so we can increase our team. Many of you write to me and say, why don't we have more reporters here, there? I'm telling you straight up, we have a sustainable model, but you don't have a growth model. If you want a Chennai bureau, which is more than just our Lone Ranger, Jayashree there, a Bengal, this thing, then that spurt has to be the sustainability and growth need different metrics. So I hope you will help us grow. Have a fantastic weekend. I'll leave you with this song. I hope you enjoy it as much as you've enjoyed the Hafta. Bye-bye.